To understand the true story of Jack the Ripper is to immerse oneself in a world of fog, gaslight, and almost unimaginable poverty, to sift through the fragments of evidence that have been scrutinized for over a century, and to accept that the final, absolute truth died with the victims in the dark alleys of Whitechapel. This is not a story with a clean conclusion, but a deep, sprawling and detailed account of the crimes, the frantic investigation, and the elusive figure at its centre. Let us begin on the streets in the year 1888. The East End of London was a place of profound social collapse. It was a warren of narrow, filth-strewn courts and alleys, a catchment area for the desperate, the unemployed, the immigrant Jewish population fleeing pogroms in Eastern Europe, and the casually broken by the Industrial Revolution. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke, rotting refuse, and the stench of the overworked cesspits that served as sewage systems for the teeming tenements. For a vast number, life was a daily struggle for food and shelter. For the women at the very bottom, that shelter was often paid for through prostitution, a desperate transaction in the shadows. It was from this world that the 5 canonical victims of the Ripper emerged, and it is with them that our story must truly begin, for their stories are the foundation upon which the legend was built. The first to die in a manner that would later be recognized as the Ripper's work was Mary Ann Nichols. She was 43 years old, a mother of 5, separated from her husband due largely to her drinking. Her life was a shuffle between common lodging houses, workhouses, and the streets. On the night of August 31st, 1888, she was turned away from her lodging house at 18 Thrall Street because she lacked the 4p for her bed. She told the deputy, "I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now," a heartbreaking statement of her intent to find a client. Her body was discovered at about 3:40 a.m. on September 1st in Bucks Row, a dark and quiet thoroughfare. Police Constable John Neal found her on her back, her clothes disarranged. At first he thought she was drunk, but the light from his lantern revealed a horrific truth. Her throat had been cut with 2 deep, savage incisions, nearly decapitating her. The initial examination by Dr. Rhys Ralph Llewellyn revealed a bruise on her face and a deep, jagged wound on her lower abdomen. The killer had begun his work, but this was a prelude, a practice in brutality. The murder was shocking, but in a district where violence was commonplace, it did not yet spark the panic that was to come. The police investigation, led by Inspector Joseph Helson of the Metropolitan Police's J Division, began with door-to-door inquiries and the questioning of known associates, but it yielded little of substance. The second act arrived just over a week later, on September 8th, and it marked a terrifying escalation. The victim was Annie Chapman, known as Dark Annie, 47 years old. She was frail and suffering from tuberculosis and a brain disease. She, too, was separated from her family and lived a hand-to-mouth existence in the common lodging houses of Spitalfields. On the night of her death, she was also turned away from 35 Dorset Street for lacking her DOS money. She was last seen alive around 5:30 a.m. in the passageway of 29 Hanbury Street, talking to a man who is described as dark-complexioned, of a shabby genteel appearance, and wearing a deerstalker hat. Her body was discovered less than an hour later in the backyard of that same address by an elderly resident, John Davis. The scene was one of unparalleled savagery. Her throat was severed deeply, but it was the mutilations to her abdomen that signalled a new level of depravity. Her abdomen had been laid entirely open, and her small intestines had been drawn out and placed over her right shoulder. Her bladder was partially removed. Most significantly, her uterus and a section of her vagina had been surgically excised and taken away by the killer. The post-mortem conducted by Dr. George Bagster Phillips, the senior police surgeon for H Division, Whitechapel, was a watershed moment. He concluded that the precision and knowledge required to remove the uterus, avoiding the rectum and the upper part of the vagina, suggested someone with anatomical knowledge, perhaps a surgeon, a butcher, or someone versed in the dissection of animals. The killer was no longer just a murderer, he was a collector of trophies, a man driven by a complex and horrifying pathology. The press, which had been covering the murders with growing interest, now erupted. The term leather apron was coined, focusing on a suspect described as a Jewish leather worker who extorted prostitutes. But this was a red herring that fueled community tensions. The real killer was still a phantom. It was at this point that the name Jack the Ripper entered the world. On September 27th, the Central News Agency received a letter written in red ink and a neat, literate hand. It was postmarked September 25th. It began, "Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track." The writer mocked the police, promised to clip the lady's ears off next time, and signed off with the immortal phrase, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." The police, suspecting a journalist's hoax, initially dismissed it, but its publication in the newspapers on October 1st captured the public's imagination perfectly. The name gave a persona to the terror, a brand for the monster. Whether genuine or a cruel prank, it forever defined the killer. The name had barely been printed when the killer executed his most audacious strike, a night of such brutal efficiency that it would become known as the double event. On the night of September 30th, the killer claimed 2 victims. The first was Elizabeth Stride, a 44-year-old Swedish immigrant known as Long Liz. She was seen by multiple witnesses in the company of a man in Berner Street, near a socialist club where a meeting was letting out. The man was described as respectably dressed, of dark complexion, and carrying a small, shiny black bag, the kind that might contain surgical instruments. At approximately 1 a.m., her body was discovered in a courtyard off Berner Street called Dutfield's Yard. Her throat was cut with a single clean incision, but there were no other mutilations. The evidence, a Cassius breath mince found clutched in her hand, the timing, the proximity of witnesses, strongly suggest the killer was interrupted, likely by the arrival of a cart into the yard. Frustrated, he left his work unfinished and moved on. He did not have to go far or wait long. Less than a mile away, and just 45 minutes later, he found Catherine Eddowes. Eddowes, 46, was a charismatic and complex woman, the common-law wife of a man named John Kelly. She had spent the earlier part of the evening in jail for public drunkenness and was released from Bishopsgate Police Station at just before 1 a.m., sober and telling the sergeant she was going home. She never made it. Her body was discovered at 1:45 a.m. in Mitre Square, a small dark square within the jurisdiction of the City of London Police, the murder of a police force separate from the Metropolitan Police, and it would create jurisdictional complications. The killer had taken his time with Catherine Eddowes. Her throat was cut, her face was mutilated with a triangular-shaped piece of her cheek, and her eyelids nicked. But the horror was in the abdominal cavity. She had been disemboweled. Her intestines had been drawn out and thrown over her right shoulder. One kidney was removed and taken away. A part of her uterus was also missing. The post-mortem, conducted by City of London police surgeon Dr. Frederick Gordon Brown, revealed a level of skill and frenzy that stunned the investigators. The killer had worked with speed and apparent purpose in a location that, while dark, was far from entirely secluded. It was a display of breathtaking audacity. That same night, a piece of Catherine Eddowes' bloodied apron was found discarded in a doorway in Goulston Street. Chalked on the wall above it was a graffito: "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Fearing it would incite massive anti-Jewish riots, Sir Charles Warren, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, ordered it erased before it could be photographed, a decision that remains one of the most controversial in the entire case. The investigation was now a maelstrom of public pressure, political interference, and professional rivalry. The Metropolitan Police, under Commissioner Warren, and the City of London Police, under Commissioner Sir James Fraser, did not always cooperate seamlessly. The lead detectives were men of contrasting styles. Inspector Frederick Aberline, a native of the East End who now headed the CID from Scotland Yard, was a thorough, methodical, and well-respected officer. He relied on traditional methods, door-to-door inquiries, interviewing thousands of people, and cultivating informants. The other key figure was Dr. Thomas Bond, a police surgeon who was asked to provide a psychological profile of the killer. His report was groundbreaking. He concluded the killer was a man of physical strength and great coolness, who must be solitary and eccentric, appearing harmless until the moment of his attack. He believed the murderer possessed no scientific anatomical knowledge, but rather a good deal of knowledge as to the position of the organs in the abdominal cavity. He suggested the mutilations indicated uncontrollable fury, a man driven by sexual and homicidal mania. This was one of the first recorded criminal profiles in history. The suspects were legion. The police files swelled with names from the plausible to the absurd. Montague John Druitt was a barrister and schoolteacher from a good family who was found drowned in the Thames shortly after the final murder. His own family suspected he was the Ripper. He remains a prime suspect for many. Aaron Kosminski was a Polish-Jewish immigrant who lived in the heart of the murder district. He was institutionalized for insanity with a strong aversion to women, and he was named as the suspect by Chief Inspector Donald Swanson in his marginal notes on a report, claiming he was identified by a witness but could not be prosecuted. Then there was the enigmatic American Francis Tumblety, a quack doctor and misogynist who was arrested in London for gross indecency but fled the country. The police considered him a very likely suspect. Other names floated included the Russian revolutionary Dr. Alexander Pedachenko, the artist Walter Sickert, and even a member of the royal family, the Duke of Clarence, in a fantastical conspiracy theory involving Freemasonry. The truth is that the police of 1888, without forensic science as we know it, were overwhelmed. They had no fingerprints, no blood typing, no DNA. They had witness statements that were often contradictory, a handful of letters, most of which were hoaxes, including the infamous From Hell letter that accompanied a piece of what was claimed to be a human kidney, and a mountain of public hysteria. The final canonical victim was Mary Jane Kelly, and her murder marked a gruesome crescendo. On November 9th, 1888, her body was discovered inside her small, single room at 13 Miller's Court off Dorset Street. She was 25 years old and, unlike the other victims, was murdered indoors, granting the killer unlimited time and privacy. The horror that met Thomas Bowyer, who was sent to collect rent, and then the police, was beyond anything they had encountered. The scene inside room 13 was a charnel house. Mary Kelly had been virtually annihilated. Her body was mutilated almost beyond recognition. Her throat was cut to the bone. Her face was hacked away, her features obliterated, her abdomen and thighs were laid open, her organs removed and carefully placed around the room, her heart on the bedside table, her liver between her feet, her breasts on the table. The post-mortem indicated she had been killed by the throat cutting, and the mutilations were performed after death. The sheer scale of the destruction, the time it must have taken, and the intimate, room-bound nature of the crime suggested a killer who had reached his apocalyptic peak. After Mary Kelly, the murders attributed to Jack the Ripper ceased as suddenly as they had begun. The investigation slowly wound down. Leads dried up. Suspects died, disappeared, or were institutionalized. The public panic subsided, replaced by a grim fascination that has never faded. The discovery of the criminal, in the sense of a definitive, court-proven identification, never happened. The case of Jack the Ripper is the ultimate cold case. The true story is not one of a solved puzzle, but of a perfect storm of social misery, inadequate policing, a cunning and monstrous individual, and the birth of a modern myth. The killer vanished back into the fog from whence he came, leaving behind 5 dead women, a terrified city, and a mystery that has consumed the world for over a century. The details are all we have. The specific cuts of the knife, the witness statements given in the cold dawn light, the desperate scribbles in police ledgers, and they point not to a single conclusion, but to a multitude of shadows, any one of which could have been the man known as Jack the Ripper.